I call the Assistant Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, I was wishing to congratulate, of course, the new Speaker to be sitting in that chair, but as the Deputy Speaker, it's wonderful to be able to congratulate you for your recovery and your health, and that you have returned to that important chair, and we're equally happy to see you there. And you've got to give it to the member for Rankin. He is slick as he auditions for the job of Leader of the Opposition in pursuit after the next election. And, of course, his so-called matter of public importance is part of that critical strategy, where he understands that when those at the opposition frontbenchers fall, he plans to snare the prize by trying to build an argument and narrative that he is the one who is interested in the future of the Australian economy. But the reality is Labor has had nothing of value to say over the past 12 months and, in fact, 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they most certainly have no agenda on how they want to build the future of the Australian economy and back Australians, not just through that difficult time, but, of course, to build the future so that they can realise their ambitions, their dreams and their hopes for themselves and their families as part of the success of the future of Australia. The reality is members on the opposition side have always preferred that Australia fail than a coalition government succeed, giving no quarters or no recognition of the incredible achievements, not just of the government, though obviously that is a critical part of the conversation, but actually how Australians have risen to the challenge of the past 2 years. Because if you just look back 2 years ago and look at the situation facing not just Australia but the world, and we saw a situation where people were looking into the abyss, into the great unknown about where we were going to head, and people were deeply worried about their future, not just for themselves, but of course for their families, for their small businesses, for their standard of living and for their future. And what Australians have done, working with the government, is risen to that challenge, to read on an epic scale across the entire continent, where we face a considerable outcome, where we're going to have one of the highest vaccination rates, if not the highest vaccination rates of any nation in the world. I remember when members of the opposition said it was a critical part of our test of our job about whether we could deliver vaccines. Well, I'd hate to break it, not just have we met that benchmark, but we've smashed it with one of the highest vaccination rates anywhere in the world. We've done that without causing considerable death as occurred in many other countries. And, of course, we've come out of the COVID-19 pandemic with a level of low unemployment. And, of course, we've done it because we have understood that the success of Australia doesn't come from Canberra down. It's because we have backed Australians through this critical time. And you just need to look at the challenge, particularly those in great states of Victoria and New South Wales have faced. We face considerable challenges around lockdowns, where small businesses have struggled to get back onto their feet because of the punitive measures introduced by state governments, often called upon even more obsessively by members of the Labor Party on the opposition benches, who want to see small businesses have been to be trashed as a consequence of harsher measures. And what we've done is turned around and said, what can we do to back them? What can we do to back the small businesses of our country, because they're the chief employers of our country, so they're in the best position to be able to keep Australians standing on their own 2 feet. And, of course, the situation out of particularly New South Wales and Victoria has been very clear. The number of new hires has been up 25% in New South Wales, while in Victoria new hires have been up 15% as we come out of this period. It's meant that Australians are in a position to be able to back themselves, back their families and, of course, back their communities as the foundation of the success of the great Australian recovery. But it's not just in that space. We see it in the hard data, because what this matter of public importance is about is, of course, around the underlying strength of the economy and particularly wages. Well, you set the benchmark, just like the vaccine rollout, so let's go with it. The latest ABS data shows wages grew by 2.2% throughout the year, higher than the 1.5% forecast in the budget. Wages growth of 2.2% in the September quarter. It's the strongest since the start of the pandemic. The benchmark was set, wages growth. Benchmark not just met, beaten, but smashed by this government, because we have continued to back Australians as a consequence. But, of course, we know that this is in direct parallel or direct contrast, I should say, with the proposals put forward by the Labor Party. And you just need to look at their position in the lead up to the last election. We see the member for Maribyrnong here, and I'm sure the member for Gaman has legitimately left because he would want to be reminded of his contribution to their train wreck election outcome, let alone the member for the Rankin, who was the co-author of their $387 billion taxes plan, which would have hit households, would have hit Australian retirees, would have hit jobs and would have hit the interests of everyday Australians. Because for the past decade, every single time the Labor Party has confronted a challenge, they have had one solution: to impose a new tax. They've run out of money, impose a new tax, because your money, the Australian people's money, they see as their own. The challenges of fiscal discipline: let's hit retirees and push them below the poverty line by imposing an up to 30% income tax on their interests. Let's look at what they want to do with households, where if we want to promote housing affordability in this country, and this government has a very proud record of getting first homeowners into homes, Labor's solution was to add more taxes to increase rents. Let's go to the portfolio of which I'm responsible for. Labor wanted to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Well, what was their solution? To impose a new tax along the way. In fact, at every single point they have found a new tax, and when they've come up with a proposition in an election where they've been asked about their new taxes, they've said one of two things: either there will not be one and then broken their promise after the election, or they have said, of course, we are absolutely doing it and you're perfectly welcome to vote against us. And that's what the Australian people have done every step of the way. And when we come up to the next election, Australians are going to face a choice about the future of our country. And it is going to come down to who do they trust to be able to deliver economic growth and opportunity so they and their children have the best chance and best wicket at life. And they know the consequences of what happens with the Labor Party. And we've seen this before. They want to impose more taxes on households, on income earners, on retirees, on houses themselves, to make sure that they can get as much of your money in their control. Because the solution from the Labor Party is always, how do we empower Canberra to impose and conform? And the solution from a Liberal government is always, how do we empower Australians and get out of their way? And this is going to be one of the biggest challenges that's going to face the Australian people in the next election. And I know the members of the Labor Party hate us talking about it, but the reality is throughout this entire pandemic period, they have consistently argued why the government should spend billions of dollars more money on the basis of them complaining that they want money to be funneled to certain interests or certain benefits. And what this government has done at every point is been prudent and responsible in how it has spent money to make sure that there has not been needless waste and, of course, needless debt. And that is an indicator of where this discussion is going to go in the future in the lead up to the next election, where they are going to spend more money and incur more debt, and correctly, as night follows day, it will put pressure on interest rates, and we will see those many Australians who have mortgages out there pay higher prices under a future Labor government. More costs of debt refinancing, more costs about their capacity to be able to afford their mortgage, and of course facing a big challenge about where they're going to be able to maintain their standards of living. Because when it comes down to it, Labor always goes after Australians' hip pockets, because that is the only solution that they have to any problem, because they always see the solution to the country through themselves, not through the success of the millions of Australian households and how they can stand on their own 2 feet. But more critically, what this government is doing is making sure that we map out a plan for the future development of the Australian economy in a globally challenging environment towards carbon neutrality. And what we have introduced outlined in the last sitting of this parliament is Australia's first comprehensive economy-wide plan, not just to get Australia to be carbon neutral, But how do we thrive in that environment and lay the foundations for the future economy and future export industries that Australians are going to come to rely upon? And to make sure that we can do so, we can back those industries that are going to have to adjust so they reach a soft landing, and we can back those Australians to be able to secure their jobs so their communities can survive and thrive, and how we can make sure that we build that future that Australians so desperately want. We want a future where every Australian can realise their ambition and their dreams. Labor wants one where their solution is more tax.
I call